Well, hello there, and welcome to this Brody Professional Development webinar on facilitating effective meetings. My name is Lori Cusick, Senior Facilitator with Brody, and if there's one thing I've heard many times, and even said myself on occasion, it's that I could be so much more effective in my job. I have so many great ideas on things to do, but I find that I spend so much time in meetings, I just don't have time to make those things happen. We all can relate to that. We all spend a lot of time in meetings, I'm sure. And the bottom line is time is money. I found these statistics to be staggering. According to the average professional, 25 to 50% of their time is spent in meetings. Oh my goodness. And the average professional attends 62 meetings per month. 53% of the time, they would say that those meetings are inefficient. And that adds up to millions of dollars wasted every year by organizations. So to top that off, when it comes down to their participation in the meeting, here's what participants say. They say that 91% will admit that they have daydreamed during meetings. I know I've done that, haven't we all? We've been in those boring meetings where it just doesn't capture our attention. Perhaps we're wondering why we're there. We find ourselves daydreaming. 39% said they've slept at meetings. Now, I must admit, I've done everything I can to stay awake. I don't think I've ever actually slept at a meeting. But can't we all relate to the times where you feel like you're about to do that head bob? We need to have more effective meetings, more engaging. 45% of participants have felt overwhelmed by meetings. Perhaps there's too much in a meeting, perhaps there are just simply too many meetings. 73% have done other work while attending a meeting. And in this day and age with webinars and virtual conferencing, things like that, we can all admit that during those things, we have multitasked. We've done other work while we were attending that meeting. I hope that this is a reminder. If you are currently doing other work, I hope that you can set that aside. And please join us in participating in this session. Perhaps you're participating by yourself, perhaps with a work group. Hopefully you can be engaged for this time together. 47% of participants have complained that meetings were their biggest waste of time. And that's precisely why we need to talk today about how we can make our meetings more effective and more efficient. The first step in creating more effective meetings is to understand the real reason for having a meeting. Do we really need to have a meeting? Have you ever heard people say, we need to have a meeting to decide how to have a meeting? Well, there's probably extra meetings there. So here are 6 reasons that you would need to have a meeting. The first is you must be certain that your message is consistent and clearly understood by the group. We don't want a game of, I tell one person, they tell the next, they tell the next, because by the time, much like the telephone game when we were growing up in school, by the time it gets to the, 3 people down, it's a different message. So we need to bring everybody together to have a meeting so that that message is consistent. The second is you want immediate two-way communication. We need to have a dialogue about this, or we need to have a group discussion about something. You need resources, opinions, or ideas to be presented, discussed, and selected during a short period of time. Get everybody in the same room, we can go over it, we can make these decisions. The fourth, you need creative thinking and collaborative problem solving. Good reason to get everybody together. 2 heads are better than 1, as we've heard many times. The fifth reason is others must carry out decisions, and a participative approach will ensure acceptance and implementation. When we're together, particularly if we're live and we can read the body language and really understand, are we all on the same page and are we all participating, then we can ensure that people are accepting our ideas, that they're implementing it in the way that we had planned. And the 6th reason to have a meeting is you want your group to develop ownership, commitment, and accountability. Again, having that nonverbal by being able to see people certainly helps. At the very least, being able to hear the tone of voice helps. But when we want a group to really have that ownership and we need to ensure that everybody's on board, having a meeting is an effective way to do so. So that's really the first step, is determining, do I have a legitimate reason to have a meeting, knowing that time is money and none of us have enough of it. The problem with meetings, it can be summed up by a Sony executive. Employees and managers are expected to learn about bad meetings by taking part in bad meetings. And that's precisely what we're going to try to solve for today. Our objective during this approximately 30 to 60-minute webinar, depending on if you want to pause it to have a conversation, it can take a little bit longer, or you can race right through and have a discussion at the end. But no matter how you do it, our objective here is to improve your meeting efficiency and effectiveness, and we're going to give you some good tools to do that. This can be used in conjunction with our Competitive Advantage series book entitled Stop Wasting Time, Make Meetings Matter by Marjorie Brody, our founder. There are some great materials within that mini book that you'll find useful. We're going to give you a couple of the tools that you can find in that book as we walk through this webinar. So here is a great framework to ensuring you have more successful meetings. It's really a 5-step framework that will help you plan for, launch, navigate, and ultimately land and close a meeting, and then what do you do after the meeting. So we're going to talk about pre-launch. That's what you do before the meeting, before we launch this meeting. The launch, meaning how am I going to open that meeting up effectively to get the participation that I like? How do I navigate during that meeting? How do I land the meeting, meaning we're all grounded by the time we walk out the door? And then what do I do in step 5 in the post-landing? How do I follow up with people who weren't able to attend? Or how do I ensure accountability toward the things that we've agreed upon? All right, so I'm going to walk you through this 5-step framework. The first step there is the pre-launch. And there are a number of tools you can utilize as you're planning for your meeting that we'll call pre-launch tools. The first is stating your meeting objectives. And I'm going to talk you through a better way to state your objectives. Rather than using verbs, we're going to express them as nouns. And I'll get to that in just a moment. The next would be a stakeholder analysis. Who's going to be there and why is it important to invite them? Because we don't want to have people who don't need to be involved in the meeting, because that's a waste of their time and your organization's money. Deciding how to make decisions is an important idea that you need to wrestle with before you get to the meeting. You'll save a lot of time if you determine how to make decisions as a group before you get there. And last but not least, setting the agenda. Very often we decide, okay, I need to have a meeting, what's my agenda, and then we decide who to invite or something like that. But if you think about these other things before you get to your agenda, I think you'll find it more effective. So let's start off by talking about those meeting objectives. A better way to state your meeting objectives is to, rather than using verbs like we typically do that describe the process of the meeting, like discuss the budget, review the project plan, brainstorm solutions, think about stating your meeting objectives as nouns. If you write the meeting objectives beginning with a noun, it's a better description of the actual deliverables that you want to achieve by the end of your meeting. So this is a better way to state it. Agreement on 3 cost-cutting solutions to support new budget requirements. That's ultimately what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with an agreement. A list of barriers to implement our project plan. A decision on the best solution to each project issue, and an action plan to implement. These are better ways to state your objectives so that people can clearly see what's going to be accomplished in that meeting. The next pre-launch tool that I listed for you was a stakeholder analysis. And there are really 4 steps to completing a good stakeholder analysis. The first is list the names of the people that you think should attend that meeting. Who do you think should be involved? Then you need to identify what's in it for each of them, the whist, if you will. What's in it for them? If we have a better understanding of what's in it for them, will understand their purpose in being at the meeting, the benefit that they bring, and they will also come because they'll understand what's in it for them. They'll have a vested interest in being there. The third step is to list the issues or concerns that you think each participant may have about attending the meeting. If you know the people that you're working with, you should probably have a pretty good understanding of what issues or concerns you think that they're going to raise. And the fourth then is to identify a win for each attendee. What's the win? What's in it for them? What's the real benefit to having them participate in that meeting? When it's clear to you and to them, you'll have far better participation during that meeting. Here's what that may look like. You could do a simple grid with these 4 columns and just list who's coming, what's in it for them, what are their concerns or issues, and what's the win for them. The next thing that I discussed that you need to think about prior to your meeting during that pre-launch phase is how decisions are going to be made. We all use a variety of decision-making techniques based on the urgency, how many people need to be involved, and things like that. And it probably looks just a little bit like this. On this left-hand side, we have a number of ways that you can make a decision. And with each one involves more people. So if the leader's going to decide, it's simple. If I'm the leader, I make a decision, there we go. Maybe I need to gather input from individuals, but if I'm the leader, I'm still going to make that decision. Perhaps we have a team. We're going to gather input from the team. Perhaps we need to all reach consensus, which could take more time. And ultimately, delegating to another individual or another team with constraints takes even more time. So as you can see on this left-hand side, as we move up the ladder in decision-making, from leader decides all the way up to delegate with constraints, it increases the amount of time it takes to make that decision. Additionally, though, it also increases the buy-in. So you need to think about how much of the buy-in do I need to have from the individuals, from the team as a whole, and how much time do I have to make this decision? If you can determine how you're going to make the decisions and then clearly identify that and state that when you get to the meeting, it will make for a much more efficient and effective meeting. And when all possible, if you need a lot of people's buy-in, try to plan your meetings in advance and give the time that's necessary to get the most effective buy-in. Last but not least, in the pre-launch phase, we're going to create the agenda. Here are the things we need to think about as we're creating that agenda. Define the objective. We talked about stating that as a noun. Identify those participants and their roles and who needs to be invited. Determine the time frames for the meeting. Solicit the participant input. In other words, are there other topics or are there issues that we need to include in our agenda? And then create the schedule. And then you ultimately want to make sure that you're giving this agenda to all of those people in advance so that they have a clear idea of what to expect when they attend that meeting. So those are the things that we need to do in this pre-launch phase. A lot of prep work, but it certainly will save time. The next then is to launch the meeting. And this could take a little time and thoughtfulness on your part before you get to the meeting as well. But it's going to really happen when you gather the participants and you start that meeting. When you launch your meeting, you want to really kick it off in the best possible way. So how am I going to start that meeting? How am I going to open that meeting? Setting the right tone, making it explicit why people are there and what you're going to cover and accomplish during that meeting. You want to also make sure that you're getting full participation by all those who attend the meeting, and trying very hard to avoid the discussion killers. So if you've thought through who's going to be there and what their issues and concerns may be, you might be able to get full participation and avoid these discussion killers right in your opening by stating, you know, I know we have some concerns about X, Y, and Z. If I may suggest, could we save those till the end, and then we'll address each of those in their due time. Something like that. That way you don't have somebody sitting there thinking, oh, I've got this concern, I'm sure they're not going to bring it up, and they're not as engaged if they have that on their mind. You also need to think about how are we going to generate ideas if that's an essential part of this meeting. And very often it is when we bring a group together. So when we're trying to get that full participation, here are some of the things to think about. We want to make sure that we keep our body language receptive and neutral. We could be sending, even without thinking about it, sending a message through our nonverbal communication, through our body language, that we're closed off to different ideas. Maybe crossed arms, maybe clenched fists. You know, what's my posture saying? Am I open? Am I leaning forward? Am I engaged with open gestures, open hands? That will lead to a better participation and better discussion during my meeting. I think you recognize when you see it if somebody's going to be open to your ideas and your participation. Think about asking open-ended questions. That gets people talking, gets more participation. Use presumptive language. If I'm asking questions, what questions do you have for me? I'm presuming people have those questions. Ask follow-up questions as necessary to really understand somebody's idea or to get more people talking about it. If you have people in the audience who are reluctant to share, you want to make sure that you ask for their help, ask for their feedback, ask for their ideas. Don't presume that if they're quiet, they don't have opinions or ideas. We just may need to give them the opportunity to speak. And if you know in advance that yet people are typically fairly quiet, you might meet with them ahead of time and ask them, you know, or prep them and let them know that you'd really like their participation and then ask them to do so. And ultimately, we're going to be establishing a very trustworthy environment by doing many of these things. When we think about idea generation, a couple of tools that might help are, you know, maybe you present a proposal. Here's a proposal, and then ask for reaction to that. Maybe you start a discussion. I'd like to start a discussion about 3 different solutions to this problem we're facing. Or maybe we're going to do brainstorming. And brainstorming is one of those things that we hear all the time, but is rarely used very effectively. When we're brainstorming, you want to have Post-it notes, flip chart paper, whiteboard, whatever it is, and you just want to get as many ideas on paper or on the whiteboard. You want to get as many ideas generated as possible. The trick is to first brainstorm first and then organize. Spit all the ideas out. Don't filter anything. And then take those ideas and then start organizing them into related topics or buckets of ideas. Then you can deal with, okay, what are the issues around this one? How is this one going to be effective? What hurdles might we face? Things like that. But brainstorm first, then organize, then apply those filters. And you may even need a time limit if you have a lot of discussion going on and say, all right, we're going to brainstorm for 15 minutes. If somebody tries to filter or starts to organize ideas, we're going to stop you, give you the timeout sign, and when we get to that 15 minutes, then we'll start to organize. Giving people that freedom to not filter can really be liberating, and one idea can lead to another, which can lead to a fabulous alternative. The next step then, that is we've done our pre-launch, we've launched our meeting, got the discussion going. The next step then is to navigate during that meeting. As we're navigating, one of the things we're going to have to watch out for are discussion killers. And this is something, going back to our brainstorming ideas, this is something that can happen quite often there. If we feel that people are grading responses during brainstorming, we want to give a timeout and say, hey, hold up, we'll get to that in a moment. The other thing is grading can also take place if we're trying to get questions. What questions do you have for me? Somebody asks a question and I say, oh, good question. And if I say that numerous times, I could be giving the perception that I'm grading their responses. And I want to be careful not to do that. So thank them for the question perhaps, or just ask for the next question. Criticizing contributions, again, that comes up a lot during brainstorming, but can come up at any point during a meeting. If we catch that, we want to try to encourage in a positive fashion, what concerns do you have? How might we get around that? We want to, if we're the leader, be sure that we're not dominating by giving our own opinions too often. Ask for others' opinions. Ask more open-ended questions. Being a poor listener is a discussion killer. Watching your nonverbal body language and making sure that you're totally engaged. Arguing, putting people in their place. How can we hold each other accountable so that no one in the room will do that, because that will destroy that trustworthy environment. And then failing to manage that participation can become a discussion killer. If we're leading the meeting and we've got a couple of people who are dominating, they're participating too much, stage hogs, as I'm going to discuss in just a moment, we need to set the tone and be a role model by managing that behavior. If we don't, what we're telling the rest of the group, the rest of the participants is, we're going to allow the stage hog to just take over the meeting, and they're not going to have an opportunity to participate. So we need to be prepared to manage that participation. While we're talking about those stage hogs, we might use something like this, and I'll give you more tips on them in just a moment, but we might use this VIP process to help handle some of the antagonism that often comes up with our stage hogs. One way to calmly handle that antagonism is what we call VIP. It's an acronym for vent, make an I statement, probe a little bit, and then problem solve. First of all, we're going to let somebody vent. If somebody has something that they feel really strongly about, they have a lot of emotion about, they are not going to be able to have a rational discussion about it until we give them the opportunity to vent. So the first step is to allow them to vent. Then we're going to make some sort of an I statement. I see that this can be frustrating. I understand how that could be frustrating, or I can see why that might make you angry. Something like that. Make an I statement. Then we're going to probe. We're going to ask questions so that we can get to the real root of the problem. Do we fully understand what the real issue is? And then we're going to problem solve by asking for their help, by asking perhaps for other people's help. How can we solve the problem that they're raising? All right? So vent, make an I statement, probe for more information, and then problem solve. Great way to handle antagonism, which very often comes up with our stage hogs. Stage hogs are the people who just won't stop talking. And if we don't manage their behavior, ultimately they end up almost taking over our meeting. So when we have a stage hog in the room, we need to try to preempt them whenever possible. All right, I know you might be having a concern about this. I'd like to address that right up front, or I'd like to address that at the end. Or perhaps it's somebody that you know is going to, or usually participates in that way. Maybe I can have a pre-meeting with them and say, I know you have a lot of information about this, or you have a lot of concerns about this, and I would like to ensure that everybody has a chance to participate. So may I ask that you state yours right up front, and then we get others, or can I ask for your help in getting everybody to participate? Something like that. We might need to probe for relevance, defer until later when they bring up these issues, note the needs of others. Does everyone in the room have this same issue that the stage hog is bringing up right now, without calling them a stage hog? And if it is a concern of everyone else, then we need to address it. If not, we suggest we move on and ask if we can meet with that person later so as not to waste the meeting time and the time of the other participants. And we can ask the audience, do we all want to talk about this now, or should we discuss this later if there's time at the end of the meeting? All right? So one way to do it, prompt them, summarize the issue as you hear it from this person who's speaking up, thank them for their opinion, for their comment, and then move on. And these are all different ways that you can manage that behavior and utilize that process. Okay? There's much more information about this in the book that I referenced at the beginning, Stop Wasting Time, Make Meetings Matter. So, after we have navigated through some of those things, perhaps obstacles that could be coming up during our meeting, then we need to land the meeting. We want to end on solid ground, land everyone on solid ground. We're essentially going to be reaching agreement. We're going to reach agreement by all the participants about what the next steps are, who's accountable for those things, whose responsibility are each of those next steps, and how are we going to follow up. All right? So those are essential at the end of a meeting so that we don't just leave things nebulous or ambiguous. All right? At the end of the meeting, take a couple of minutes and say, all right, so we've agreed upon this. Here are the different responsibilities. I'll follow up with a quick email so that we're all in the loop. Okay? So those are some things that you can think about in terms of gaining agreement, which is essentially landing the meeting at the end, tying it up, closing up that meeting. And then, of course, after the meeting, we have a little bit to do as well. We call that PostLand. And that's where you want to be thinking about balancing three legs of the stool. When we're following up in a meeting, which very often now happens through a follow-up email, perhaps meeting minutes, that sort of thing, we want to basically identify these three things. What was discussed, how we're going to accomplish whatever it is that we agreed upon, and whose responsibility are each of those steps. So we're going to answer the what, the how, and the who. All right? We can do that with a post-land or post-meeting email, circulating the minutes, but that enables all of the people who are in the meeting to be reminded of what was discussed, hold each other accountable, and it's also a great means to fill in people who were not able to attend the meeting on what was discussed, whose responsibility things will be, and how we're going to follow up. Okay? So that is our 5-step framework for successful meetings. And I think you're probably doing most of these anyway, but when we do each of these with purpose, you will find that you will have much more successful meetings. They'll be more efficient and more effective. And here is our motto for success that relates to those 5 steps. Prior and proper planning and preparation prevent poor performance. Kind of a tongue twister. But it's so true when it comes to planning for these meetings to make more efficient use of all the participants' time, make the meetings more effective, and free up more of your time to really accomplish the things that you want to accomplish in your role. I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that if you are alone, you take some time to reflect on these 5 steps, perhaps read more about it in the Competitive Advantage series books, and particularly Stop Wasting Time, Make Meetings Matter. And if you'd like more information, you can visit our website at brodypro.com. Enter the password Brody for additional resources, or give us a call and we'd be happy to discuss how we can further assist in making meetings better in your environment. Thank you so much, and I hope your next meeting is fabulous.